Hello, my name is Matt Radizek, and I'm an application engineer for Prolim PLM. My primary focus is NX CAD, and I'm based out of our Cincinnati, Ohio office. Today we're going to go over large assemblies and some of the tools available in NX to make working in large assemblies easier for you. Moving into our agenda for today, we're going to be looking at a few categories of tools for managing our large assemblies. First, we're going to look at tools focused on simplifying parts and sub-assemblies to reduce the amount of complex geometry in the assembly that you're currently working with. Then we're going to take a look at commands that help you control what is being loaded into the assembly. This includes commands that control what data is loaded for each component and commands that control how many components are loaded. Finally, we will take a look at the ways of limiting what components are displayed to reduce the graphic load on your computer. In the first section, we'll be covering the tools for simplifying parts and sub-assemblies. This includes the Simplify Assembly command, the Wrap Assembly command, and the Linked Exterior command. The first command we're going to be taking a look at today is the Simplify Assembly command. This command has a wizard that guides you through the process of simplifying the assembly with various tools. The end goal being to create a single body with no internal faces to represent the assembly. Some of the tools available in the wizard include Extrude Exterior Representation, so you extrude over the assembly to create a representation that encompasses the entire assembly. Plug Circular Holes, which I'll be demonstrating later, but its results are shown below in the two images, and it's actually quite useful. And then Unite All, which is used at the end of the Simplify assembly to combine all the simplified bodies that you created throughout the other commands into one single body. Then at the end, once you're done with everything, you can also run an optional leak check that will verify that the simplified assembly representation is a single body with no internal faces. Next up is the Wrap Assembly command, which kind of speaks for itself. For this command, you simply need to specify the components that you want to wrap, and NX will automatically create a rough exterior representation of the assembly. The body created kind of looks like if you took plastic wrap and wrapped up your assembly. This tool can also be used as a shrink wrap tool for file sharing. If you ever need to send a file to your customer, but you don't want to send all the intelligence along with it, you can use this to simplify the body, but still give the customer a general idea of the shape and size of the assembly. One key note with this command is that with the newer versions of NX, specifically 1847 and newer, you will need to toggle off automatic work part change, a new setting introduced in 1847, in order to create the wrap assembly at the assembly level. I'll get more into why you have to do this in the demonstration, but I just wanted to add that here. Moving on to the final command for this section, we have Linked Exterior. This command creates an envelope similar to how the wrap assembly does, but links the actual faces, making it a more accurate and pretty much exact representation of the original assembly. Also, the linked exterior command is creating sheet bodies rather than solid bodies, like Simplify Assembly and Wrap Assembly. This command works really well for assemblies like transmissions or engines with a large number of hidden components but few exterior faces, leading to great performance benefits for your assemblies. With that concludes the first section of PowerPoint slides. Now we'll go into a demo section where we go through and demonstrate each of these three commands and just show you how each of them run in an actual assembly. All right, now that we're in NX, this is the assembly we're going to be working with today. I showed it on a couple images in the PowerPoint slides, but you might have seen this assembly before in other NX demos or videos. It's a pretty common one that jumps around for different topics. It's a pretty big assembly. It's got 9,679 components. And before we get started with looking at the commands for simplifying assemblies and sub-assemblies, I want to show you one setting for all three of these commands that helps you out in the long run. So all three of these commands will actually create a reference set for you, a simplified reference set. Now, in order for it to automatically be created, you have to enable a setting. So if you go into File, go down to Utilities, Customer Defaults, you just need to go into your Assembly section in Customer Defaults, Site Standards, and here you can specify your simplified reference set. I have it specified as simplified. You might just want it as simple, but this just needs to be specified so that when you create a simplified assembly or when you create a wrap assembly, this reference set will automatically be created and everything that you've created using these commands is automatically added to that reference set. So there's a little less work involved for you. Now moving on, we're going to be going through the commands we just covered in the PowerPoint slides. The first being the Simplified Assembly command. Now, for this command, we're actually going to be taking a look at a sub-assembly, this saw metal assembly. Now, in here, our main focus is going to be getting rid of all of the holes throughout the assembly. We just want to plug in all these holes. Now, the Simplified Assembly command is going to make it easy for us by automatically going in and plugging all those for us, so we don't have to go in and manually do it. Now, I mentioned before that this command is a wizard, so it's going to take us step by step through the process of simplifying our assembly. In the first step, it's going to ask us for the bodies that we want to link into this Simplified Assembly, the bodies that we want to modify. So I'm going to go ahead and select the saw, the actual saw piece of this assembly, since this bottom piece we aren't really worried about. And then it's asking for a blank. So this is the information we want Simplified Assembly to hide once we're done. So if we specify none, it won't hide any of the information. If we select original data, it'll hide the original bodies that I just selected. If we select all data, it'll hide all the information, including the stuff that isn't currently selected. So I'm going to leave it as original data. And click Next. And now it's going to go in and create linked bodies for all of the bodies in the saw, so that it has something to work with throughout the tools that we're going to be using. Now, once you get to this step, it's going to give you the option of selecting which tools you want to use. The tools available are the Extrude dialog, the Plug Circular Holes, Body from Outline, Bounding Sphere, Body from 3D Profile, and finally, the Unite All. Like I said earlier, we're just going to focus in on this Plug Circular Holes for this assembly. Now, in the next prompt, it's asking us for a hole diameter. So the specified hole diameter currently is 25. So what it's going to do is, once I select my bodies and hit Next, it's going to select all the holes in those bodies that have a diameter less than 25. And then it's going to prompt us asking if we want to deselect any of the holes that are currently selected. In this case, I don't really want to deselect any, but if there was a particular hole in your assembly that you wanted to keep and you didn't want it to plug, you could deselect that hole here so that it doesn't go in and automatically plug it for you. So now NX is going to go through on all those faces and plug up all those holes for us. All right, and with that, we're going to move into the Unite All and just select all the bodies here, just so that we get a single body out of the Simplified Assembly. And with that, we've united all 30 bodies into one. I'm going to go ahead and click Next. And it's going to prompt us for boundaries for the interior and exterior faces. So I'm going to go ahead and select this face as our exterior. And it prompts us for boundaries. I'm just going to go ahead and click through this. And then it's going to ask us to verify interior faces for a leak check. Now, I'm not going to run the leak check on this assembly, but this is available if you ever need it or you want something to run a leak check on your assemblies. Now with that, we finish up our Simplified Assembly. And we're left with this assembly with a single body with no holes. Now, in our top level assembly, if we clip our section and go in and look at it, you can see that our sub-assembly actually still have the holes in it. Now what we can do is we go into Saw Metal and just go in and replace our reference set down to Simplified. And with that, we have a Simplified Assembly with no holes. Now another key note is that in your sub-assembly, where I created the Simplify Assembly, if you go into your Part Navigator, it is listed in your model history, so you can go and modify it if you ever need to in the future. Now we're going to be taking a look at the Wrap Assembly command. For this command, we're going to be using a different sub-assembly. We're going to be using this shafting arrangement port A. And you might remember that with this command, I mentioned a setting that you would need to toggle off. And that setting is the allow automatic work part change, listed here underneath the selection tab. Now I want to show you why this needs to be toggled off. Go ahead and start my command. And it prompts me to select some geometry. Now, if I try and select the geometry for these components, which I want to select all the components in here, it won't let me. And you might think it might be because of your selection filter. So if I set this to entire assembly, and go ahead and try and select my components, it won't let me either. But if I try to select one component, it actually makes that component my work part, hence allow automatic work part change. And now at this point, NX is thinking I want to create a wrap assembly inside of this one component part, which I don't actually want to do. So I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel and toggle off allow automatic work part change. Now when I go into my command, it'll allow me to select all the components in this file, just like I want. And now with this command, there's also a few other settings. So if you wanted to control the relative sharpness of the wrap, you could do that. But for this instance, I'm just going to use the default settings. Go ahead and hit OK. It's going to go ahead and wrap my assembly for me. And with the wrap assembly, it also creates it at the top level of the sub-assembly. So if I go into my part navigator, I can see the wrap assembly listed under model history. So I can modify it here if I ever needed to. Now if I go into my top level, you can see the shafting arrangement is still in the model reference set. So I'll go back into my port A and do a replace reference set to simplified. And there's my simplified reference set. And that is the wrapped assembly command. Now, moving on to our final command for this section, we're going to be looking at linked exterior. For this command, we're going to be using another separate sub-assembly. We're going to be using this 50 caliber mounted machine gun. And now with the linked exterior command, the selection steps are actually pretty straightforward. The actual command only prompts you for candidate bodies. So you'll select your candidate bodies, and you actually have a select all button here, so you don't have to manually select them. So you can go in and just window select anything that wasn't selected once you hit select all. Moving on to your exterior faces, you can just select exterior faces. It'll go in and select all the exterior faces associated with the bodies that you already selected. Then we're going to hidden lines, where you can specify a vector to represent your hidden lines. But I'm just going to go ahead and skip through this. I want to select hide original just to hide the original parts once the linked exterior is completed. And I'll go through and process creating all those sheet bodies to represent to create an exact representation of this assembly. Now, the benefit of this linked exterior over the wrap assembly is that the output is a lot more refined. So with the wrap assembly, it was just a rough exterior representation. So it's kind of like a block encompassing the actual assembly, whereas with this, it's going to create refined sheet bodies so that it looks the same. So you have that same level of detail on the outside without all the components on the inside that bog down the system and make the assembly run slower and load slower. And there we go. So as you can see, based on the quick pick here, it's actually listed as a sheet body of the linked exterior region. So if I go into my model history here, you can see all the bodies listed from the actual model. But here's our linked exterior. And you can tell that just by changing this to sheet body, that everything here is a sheet body, because the actual solid bodies were hidden because of our settings when we created the linked exterior. Now back on our top level, this will still be our model reference set. We'll have to go in and change that just like we did the other commands. So we'll go in and do a replace reference set and set it to simplified. And we'll have our sheet bodies. And that is the linked exterior command. Now, moving into our second section, we're going to be taking a look at commands that help us control the data loaded for our components. And the main goal of these commands is to reduce the weight of our assembly, make it as lightweight as possible, just to make it load faster, run faster, and generally bog down our system less. For these commands, we're going to be looking at reference sets, which we've covered already a little bit with the simplified versus the model-based reference set, load options, and then we're going to go a little bit more into detail on lightweight representations and minimal loading and what those are. So first, we're going to be talking about reference sets. And for reference sets, they are used to control what is loaded from each component. There are 3 system-generated reference sets: entire part, model, and empty. The model reference set name can also be modified in your customer defaults under Assembly's site standards. This is also where we set our simplified reference set previously, so that NX would automatically create those simplified reference sets for you when using the Simplify Assembly, Wrap Assembly, and Linked Exterior commands. In the images below, I'm just kind of showing you some of the different toolbars that involve reference sets. On the left-hand side, I'm showing you how to enable the utility on your ribbon bar, just to turn on the reference set option. The middle image, I'm just showing you the replace reference set, which we went through several times with the previous demonstration of going in and just changing the reference set to simplified for each of those components when we created a new simplified reference set for them. And then on the right-hand side, this is what the dialog box for the reference set command looks like. And this is where you can create a new reference set for a new user custom reference set, or you can even delete old reference sets. So like the simplified one that's automatically created, say you create a simplified reference set automatically for like a wrap assembly, and you decide you don't actually want to use that, you want to create your own. You can actually come in here and delete that reference set or modify it by just selecting it and then reselecting the objects that you want to appear in that reference set. Now we're going to be looking at load options. And with load options, our primary focus is just minimizing our assembly loading time. Just making the assembly load in as quickly as possible so you can get the job done and get whatever you need to do in the assembly done so you can keep on working. So with your load options, you can set which components will be loaded. You can set how the components are loaded, whether that be if you are going to be partially loading the components in or fully loading. Lightweight representations, whether or not you want it to load in inner part data, which is your wavelink information. Your reference set preferences, which is a priority setting that you can set so that your load options will prioritize say a simplified reference set over your model reference set, so that if a simplified reference set is available in an assembly, it'll use that instead. Or even if you only want to do structure only. Going a little bit more into detail on the different options, the load options, or specifically underneath scope load, you see where it says all components. This is where you can define the components that you want NX to load. Structure only, like I mentioned earlier, only loads the structure of the assembly without loading any parts or memory graphically. So think of it as your display is actually completely empty, but all the components are listed, but none of them are turned on. So you can go in, load it as fast as you possibly can, because you might not need everything in that assembly. So you just open up the top level as structure only, and you turn on what you need. You can also here define specific component groups you want it to load, which we'll get in more to component groups later. Now, underneath the scope settings, there's also an option dropdown. And underneath this dropdown are a few different options. There's fully load, which is load everything. I want it to load all the geometry, regardless of visible status, and all the feature data. Partially load, which is kind of like a display only kind of option. I want to load the geometry in the active reference set. It does not load feature data. It does load attributes and expressions. And then for both of these, fully load and partially load, there's a lightweight option, which we'll get into more detail on what lightweight representations are later. But lightweight representations are generally just a faceted representation, trying to make the bodies load as quickly as they possibly can. And then there's the new minimal load lightweight option. This was added in NX 12 for Team Center integration, but it was recently enabled for native NX as well. And it allows us to load bodies in the active reference set, load attributes, but not expressions. And now we're going to get a little bit more into detail on lightweight and the new minimal loading. Now, lightweight representations, again, are facet bodies that represent the real model, resulting in a faster loading time. Facet bodies in general just have less information associated with them, so there's less information to load in. Starting in NX 7.5, these are automatically created. And a key note about lightweight representations is that if you ever find yourself unable, when you're using lightweight representations, to select something for a command, like such as the wrap assembly command, try right-clicking the component and selecting Show Exact. Now, what happens is if I would use the wrap assembly with a lightweight loading, the components that I'm trying to grab I wouldn't be able to select them because there are still those facet bodies, and NX isn't able to make a wrap of those facet bodies. So I need to go in and select Show Exact to show the exact model so that the wrap assembly I can actually select those components. And then there's minimal loading, and which minimal loading makes use of multi-core processors to improve your load performance. The assembly is displayed early in the load process, so you can set up your scene. Now, what this means is that take structure only, for example. So with structure only, you load in your assembly and it's completely blank. There's nothing there. It's just the components listed. They're all turned off, and you can turn them on as needed. What minimal loading does is it shows you that turning on process. It's turning on all those components, and it's loading them all in, but it's showing you the process of loading them in. So you can see the progress of the loading, and you can also set up your scene. And by scene, they mean you can use your zoom, pan, rotate, show and hide to set up your assembly for when you are going to start working on it, so that you're not just sitting there waiting for it to load. You can actually start prepping the assembly for what you're going to be doing. And this even has a dynamic display option. So you have control of this loading phase where you can pause or stop the loading phase. So say if it gets to a certain point with the load and you're like, oh, I don't need to load anything else, you can hit stop. Or you're trying to set up your scene, so you wanted to go ahead and just pause it real quick so you can set up your scene and then hit play. And then you could do it that way too. So there's a lot of options here, and it's a very powerful tool. And this was actually added in NX 1872 for native NX. And I think I mentioned this earlier, but it was available earlier for NX 1202, but it was only available with Team Center integration. It's also worth mentioning that minimal loading is now the default option for NX. So out of the box, once you install NX, minimal loading will be set automatically. Now, moving back into a short demo section, I just want to demonstrate for you guys what the load options look like and how you can use them on your assemblies. So in this assembly that I had opened earlier, you can tell on the right-hand side of the assembly navigator that I have this load state enabled, which shows how this assembly was loaded. And I actually did a fully load on this whole assembly, so it took quite a while for the assembly to actually open up everything. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and reopen this assembly. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to reopen it using different load settings. And I'm not going to go through every single one because I don't want you guys to have to sit here and watch me load in, fully load, partial load, fully load lightweight, partial load lightweight. So I'm just going to skip ahead and just do minimal load, which is the new default option, which is also the fastest option. Just so you guys can see what the load process for that looks like, and I can show you the settings for load options. And as you can tell, it's going to take quite a while to close this because I had everything fully loaded as well. So I just go into Open and find my top level assembly. Now I'm going to go into my options here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this specified as from folder, leave this as all components, and then right here where I have it set to fully load, I'm going to set this to minimally load lightweight display. Now with this, I'm now going to specify my reference sets, which I mentioned prior, which I already have this simplified set as priority. So with simplified set as my priority, so no matter what, if a simplified reference set is available, it will choose to open that assembly with the simplified reference set over any other reference set. I can add a new reference set here if I would like, and then apply to all assembly levels, which you want to have this checked so that your sub-assemblies also pull from the same priority setting. So leave this checked on. Bookmark restore options, and then save load options. We'll get more into bookmarks later. And this is where you can save your load options so that it does the same thing every time. I'm going to go ahead and OK, and choose to open up my assembly. And now here's the little dynamic display options, and you can actually see the assembly being loaded in the display window. If I wanted to pause it, I can. So it'll stop where it's at with the loading, and I can rotate, zoom, show and hide parts. I can do whatever I want just to set up the scene so that I'm ready to work once the assembly is loaded in. Go ahead and hit play, and we'll continue loading in the rest of the assembly until it's fully loaded, at which point this toolbar will disappear. Now you might notice now that the minimal load is done that it looks a little bit different than it did when I closed it. And that's because of the shafting arrangement here. So with the priority settings we set, we had it specified so that the simplified reference set was prioritized over other reference sets. And we applied that at all assembly levels. So you can see here for the shafting arrangement starboard, which we didn't modify in the previous section, already had a simplified reference set in it. It just wasn't specified when we closed the assembly previously. So with reopening the file, since we had our priorities set, it automatically looked into that assembly and saw that there was a simplified reference set, so it automatically pulled that for us. Now we're going to look at tools to help us control the number of components loaded. I won't be demonstrating all of these commands, but I want to mention all of them so you know what all is available to you. So once we have the assembly open, this is how we can control what is being displayed, what is loaded to memory, and how we can limit them. This section we're going to be looking at product outline, component groups, bookmarks, open by proximity, find component, and update structure. First off is product outline. Now, what this does is it defines a faceted representation for selected geometry so the overall shape and size of the assembly can be displayed. This can be toggled on and off and is stored on a layer. 190 is the default, but this can be changed in your customer defaults if you ever need to. Below I have 3 images. The 2 images of the car show how product outline can be used when working on components such as an engine block, so that you can see the engine block but still be able to have a feel for the other components surrounding it. On the right is a dialog box for the command, just to show you what it looks like in its various settings. Component groups. Now these are very useful. They're used to create subsets of assemblies for assembly context control. What this means is you can create a group and include in this group components that are commonly worked on together. So you can easily load all those components to memory or unload them by simply loading or unloading that group. Also, when creating component groups, there's an intelligent component selection so that you can specify what components you want to add to the group based on shared name, state, attribute, or size, or you can simply select them from a list of components. If you don't see the component groups listed in your assembly navigator, all you need to do is right-click in your assembly navigator by where the descriptive part name is, and scroll down and check box where it says Show Component Groups. And also, as a side note, these can also be saved by session or in the part file. So if you wanted to save these component groups to a part file so that other people can use them, you can do that. Or if you just want it for a one-time off session, and then you can it'll be gone when next time you close the file and reopen it. Now, moving on to bookmarks. Now, this is exactly what it sounds like. This tool lets you record your assembly state so you can quickly get back to it in the future. This can be used when you're closing up shop for the day, but you know that come tomorrow morning, you need to be right back in this area of the assembly working on it. Bookmarks can record your applied component groups, your active load options, and your loaded components. And they can also be shared with other users. So if you're working on an assembly and another user is going to be working on that same area the next day, you can just send them the bookmark so that he can open up that assembly in the same state that you had it, so it's easier to reference. Now, sometimes when working in these large assemblies, you might find yourself working on a component or a sub-assembly where you need the surrounding components to reference for a top-down workflow. And that's what Open by Proximity is for. This allows you to create a bounding box around your selected component with a specified range, so it will load its surrounding components to memory so that you can work on that component with all the information around it loaded. You can also use true shape filter for this when you're working on something like a cable that twists throughout an assembly. But just be aware that when using true shape, the evaluation time may take longer. Now, in these large assemblies, it's not always easy to find the component you need, and that's why there's find components. Pretty straightforward. It's just an intelligent search engine that allows you to search based on name, state, attribute from a list, or even size. And each of these is cumulative, so if you ever need to search by both name and size, you can, so that only parts that meet both criteria, the name you specified and the size you specified, that way only those parts will pop up. You might notice this is the same search engine. This looks pretty similar to the search engine for component groups. It's because it's the same one. Just for familiarity, to use the same search engine for all of these commands. Now, update structure. This command gives you the ability to update the structure of unloaded sub-assemblies and their components without having to load them to memory. This just ensures that the unloaded assemblies are up to date for the component groups, find component, and open by proximity commands. This command is somewhat hidden, so on the right-hand side, I put an image of where you can find it. You just need to right-click in your assembly navigator where the descriptive part name is. Scroll down close to the bottom, and there's the update structure command is listed. And then on the left-hand side is just a picture of what the command looks like. You just specify the component, and you can change how many levels you want to update. Now, closing out, we only have a few more slides to get through, and we're going to be looking at tools that help us control what components are being displayed. These tools are filter components and work part, or emphasize work part. Now, filter components. This is a pretty straightforward option. In these large assemblies, a lot of time your assembly navigator gets cluttered with unloaded and hidden components, and it just makes it difficult to find the components you want, similar to the find components command. Filter components is just an option that helps you clean up your assembly navigator. You can specify what components you want your filtered assembly navigator to hide. So in your assembly navigator properties, you can specify if you want unloaded components, hidden components, excluded by reference set, or not being visually reported on components to be removed from the filtered assembly navigator so that they're just hidden, so that you have less to scroll through. Also, you can tell if your assembly navigator is filtered by looking at the part name column. You can see in the two images below where I have the assembly navigator for both the unfiltered and filtered, where it says descriptive part name. The one that's filtered has a filtered listed. So if you ever open up an assembly and you're confused on where all your parts are, you can see that it's filtered there. So, work part. Now, almost everyone knows about this, but it's worth mentioning. The work part functionality focuses on the specific part in the assembly you're working on and just fades out all the other components. This helps improve clarity for the part you're working on and just makes it easier to work on that part inside the context of the assembly. Also, I mentioned earlier with the wrap assembly command that there's a new setting called Allow Automatic Work Part Change, which can be toggled on and off underneath your selection tab. This setting just makes it so that if you select an object outside the current work part while making a feature, the work part will automatically change to that component that you selected. This does change some workflows when working in assemblies. So if you're ever having trouble with your work part changing and like a workflow that you're used to doing in your large assemblies, try turning the setting off. It'll probably fix the issue. It's gonna be a little different getting used to. And that concludes today's webinar. If you missed anything or want to rewatch a section of this, it'll be posted on our YouTube channel where our other webinars and videos are posted. So if you're looking for information on anything else related to NX, you can find it on our YouTube channel. We're now going to be opening it up for questions. My email is also listed here. if you want to contact me outside of this webinar another time.